feel free to do that. So I'll get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Bree Kimberling. I am a nurse at North Kansas City Hospital, and I work in the Community Health and Wellness Department. So I get the privilege of hosting little events like this. So today we have Amy Tibbitts. She is a licensed clinical social worker. Yes. Okay. All the letters there. Amy is the founder and director of the Lilac Center. She is also does adjunct clinical faculty at UMKC and other clinical supervision and practicum oversights at various universities. So a lot of teaching, sounds like. Amy has been providing dialectical, did I say it right? Behavioral therapy, also known as DBT, since 1999 with extensive knowledge in treating individuals with borderline personality disorder and clients at high risk of self-harm. Amy has authored a couple books, DBT Skills Workbook, You Untangled, Practical Tools to Manage Your Emotions and Improve Your Life, as well as You Empowered, Get Beyond the Trauma You've Experienced to Live a Full and Happy Life. The Lilac Center just published a book as well, Finding Calm Amidst COVID-19 Panic. That was a mess, wasn't it? They have 3 locations in the Kansas City area and 1 in Topeka. And you can find them at lilaccenter.org. Anything else you want to add real quick, Amy?
Nope.
Okay.
Sounds fantastic.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. And what I wanted to cover is early intervention for anxiety and trauma. And so I will just start I'm going to stand up and try to be a little bit more energetic as I do a training via Zoom and give you the information that I find most helpful in intervening with trauma. So dialectical behavioral therapy is a cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive therapy just is about working on your thoughts and confronting cognitive distortions. For a lot of people that have been traumatized, they have overgeneralization of the trauma to other things in their life. So it's raining outside today. So if I went out and I got into a car accident, an overgeneralization is that I shouldn't drive when it's raining. So there is some truth that I need to be more cautious in the rain when driving, but to then become panic and scared every time it rains to drive is then that's where the cognition starts to impact whether or not the person is able to confront their trauma responses. I was recently talking to a gentleman that had reached out to me about math trauma. And I'm like, well, what is math trauma? And so he explained that every time he goes to do math, he gets triggered and he's not able to think clearly regarding the math. And so we kind of dug into that a little bit more, and really it came from having unsupportive parents and teachers when learning the math concepts and being told that he was dumb and couldn't do it, that caused then this overgeneralization. And then every time now he goes to do math, he's unsuccessful. So cognitions and what people think about something really does impair them, and then they become automatic beliefs that people have. So that's one part of the therapy. The other part of the therapy is behavioral. And so behavioral intervention has to do with taking action in the behaviors that are associated with certain emotional stimulus become a way to avoid the emotion altogether. So a lot of compulsions are behavioral solutions. So self-interest behavior is something we work a lot with because it's extremely effective in changing emotions. And so if someone does self-harm, they actually get a rush of dopamine and then are change, their emotional state is changed. So the problem with any compulsion is that it creates more harm. And so the emotion and the problem surrounding the emotion is never solved. And they get into a repetitive pattern of doing that same behavior over and over again, trying to rid themselves of the emotion. So they believe the emotion is the problem, and they try to solve the problem by doing this compulsive behavior. The truth is, it's the compulsive behavior that's driving the emotional response and making it more intense. So anytime somebody does something that is, and I'll kind of draw it out behind me, it does something that is in reaction to the emotion, they actually intensify the emotional response. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy. Dialectic is the third component of the therapy. And dialectics is fascinating. It's a philosophy, actually. And so the philosophy was developed in the 1700s by Hegel. And Hegel was a philosopher that was really considered the grandfather to Marx. So there was dialectics, and then there was actually communism. And so from dialectics, what it was saying was that there's multiple truths present all at the same time, and that things can look opposing to one another and still be present. So you can want independence and be dependent at the same time. So we see a lot of dialectics all the time, like whether you're parenting, whether you can, you're in a relationship with someone and you can love and hate them at the same time. There's always that opposing force. And our democracy is based off of a dialectic. So a lot of systems come from dialectics. So Republicans and Democrats look like they're opposing, but there's an umbrella that's supposed to branch over both that create the greatest good. So they say when you have two opposing ideas, that really that tension creates the greatest good. In that things move forward when there is a dialectic present. And so you don't want to ever avoid conflict or having a difference of opinion with someone in a relationship, because really it's that difference of the two that creates the movement, and the movement then usually, hopefully, is in a positive direction. So what we'll talk about today is when that movement is not in a positive direction. And Marsha Linehan, who developed the therapy, really talked about applying dialectics internally. And so I've talked a lot about in Hegel and these other theorists about applying dialectics external to you. And what Marsha Linehan did, and the beauty of her work, is she applied them to us as individuals. And so let me draw that out for you. Can you see me okay? How does that look? Can you see it? All right. Well, I just have it kind of propped up here. So if you have a big X here, on the top part, we're going to have biology. And the bottom is social learning. And so just to kind of talk about that, maybe I won't use the board, but maybe I'll direct myself to it. So on the top, so it's a biosocial theory. So on the top of the biology, we're looking at three factors, especially with trauma. So the three factors biologically are high sensitivity, high reactivity, and a slow return to baseline. So we all have biological vulnerabilities. Most of the time, they're going to be around one of two areas. One is around physically how we're feeling. So if we're sick, if we're hungry, if we're tired, we're biologically vulnerable. If we have a mental illness, we're biologically vulnerable too. So some people have a lot of biological vulnerability, and some people don't have as much biological vulnerability. So I run marathons. I am physically active. I get great sleep. My kids currently are doing phenomenal. I don't have a lot of biological vulnerability right now. But if I got sick or had something going on, my sensitivity and my emotional sensitivity would go up. If I'm biological vulnerability also comes around things you really care about. So if something happened to one of my kids, or if my husband was upset with me, I would have some biological vulnerability. So the biological vulnerability starts to happen, and then it becomes a dialectical dilemma. So the tension starts to be created with the social learning that I have come to believe or any trauma that I've had. So those are around not being able to share private experiences, problem solving being oversimplified, and emotions being punished. So my husband's not home right now, so let me talk about him freely. So if I had high emotional vulnerability, which I've already admitted to, I have high emotional vulnerability to my husband. And let's say he's sick and he's tired and he's not being very reactive or very loving towards me. So then I cannot share my upset with him very well. So I start to internalize it. And then I think I'm just being silly. I just need to get over it. I need to let it go. And then I start to punish myself for being emotional to begin with. Like, what's wrong with me? Right? So I would be actually doing all three of those things inadvertently. So I have this high emotional vulnerability. And then the bottom part here, they call self-invalidation. I would start to invalidate myself. So emotional vulnerability and self-invalidation. So when I start to self-invalidate, that's where a dilemma starts to take place. Now, there's actually two other dilemmas that are super common to people. The other dilemma is between being apparently competent and active passivity. So it kind of looks the same. So same kind of diagram here. So apparent competence on one end is where you act as if everything is okay. You don't need anything. So I have been married 32 years. I have most certainly had many times where I say to myself, and maybe even out loud to my husband, I don't need you. I can do it myself. Leave me alone, right? And that's apparent competence. Now, the active passivity starts to come in when I just give up. I just don't do anything about it. So the problem's there, but someone has to come in and rescue me from the problem. And that's usually an emotional response where you're just devastated, you're hurt, you're upset. Where I see it most in the workforce is with gossiping. So you might tell someone directly, I'm fine, we're good, I have no problems. And then on the other end, you're talking about them behind their back. And so that's a very common dialectical dilemma that people have. And then the third category is the most fascinating to me. So the third one is between inhibited grief and unrelenting crisis. So inhibited grief is where you try your hardest to control, master, or manipulate a situation for what you want to have happen. So I have my own brother is going through a divorce, and this divorce has been going on for 3 years. And every time I talk to him, he talks endlessly about his divorce. Does anybody know someone like this? And in fact, anybody I know that's involved in a court case, this happens, right? And so what they're trying to do is that they're trying to control the outcome of something. And they're trying to inhibit loss of some sort that they're wanting to prevent. So the inhibited grief is really about not wanting to experience the consequences of whatever is going on. As I said earlier, usually get really good sleep, but the only time I've ever been up at night is when I'm trying to inhibit grief. Like I know a loss is pending, but I'm trying to think my way through it and out of it. When you do that, you have crisis come up in your life that seem like bad luck, bad fate. So we have clients that come into our center that have so much crisis going on, it seems unbelievable. Like they could have their house burned down, get in a car wreck, their dog run away, like numerous things. And that's like in 1 week, like every week there's this crisis that's going on. So what the ideal of dialectics is to really be in the center, to really be in wise mind. So you recognize like when you start moving to these extremes, and then you bring it back into balance and into center. And as a therapist, what we do is that we talk to people all day, every day, about when they're at these extremes and how to move back into balance. So if someone has a lot of unrelenting crisis, what we're going to work on is really unwavering compassion. So we're going to talk to them, be very compassionate about what they're going through. Because remember, what we're trying to combat is this belief that they cannot share exactly what's going on. And then for the emotional vulnerability, we're going to really work with someone on orientating them to change. Like it's going to be okay. Change is going to happen and it's going to be okay. And then when someone has a lot of active passivity, like just giving up, we actually become quite bossy. I don't know how else to really explain it, but we become very demanding. Like you must do these things. You have to. And then for inhibited grief, we are going to look at a lot of flexibility. Like how can you be more flexible? Like things are going to change, and how can, instead of becoming more rigid, of having the things be exactly the way they want, how they can be more flexible. For self-invalidation, we're going to work a lot on acceptance. And for the apparent competence, self-nurturing. So each of these dialectics we're going to confront and then try to use the skills taught in DBT, which are just timeless skills that are all like ancient wisdom. They're not any new age type of skills. So, all of the interpersonal skills are around assertiveness training. All of the emotion regulation skills are around acceptance of the current emotion and riding the wave of emotion without trying to interrupt or change it. Distress tolerance skills are all about radically accepting situations as they are, and how do you do that? And then all of it is underpinned by mindfulness of really being in the present moment. So what happens when someone is traumatized is, instead of moving towards wisdom or the center, they actually move farther out. And people start to experience this external chaos with them within the relationships. So to give an example, a fictitious example, if I was attacked going into the Lilac Center, and time had passed, but I was still shooken up and very upset about it. And Bree comes up to me. I don't see her, but she taps me on the shoulder and she startles me. So for the emotional vulnerability, I would have a heightened sensitivity, a heightened reactivity to her, and a slow return to baseline. So normally, if I get startled, which would be a very normal response, it would take me less than 2 minutes to return to baseline. But since I have a trauma history, it's going to take me much longer, maybe the whole day, to return to baseline. So maybe Bree looks at me and says, "What is wrong with you? I don't understand." And I don't tell her anything. I start to hide all of this down here. And let's say I go back into my office and I just drink myself some vodka to calm my nerves, to be okay. So any compulsive behaviors is actually going to move me away from center more. So I'm going to get worse. So what I always like to tell people is that you cannot betray the integrity of your own mind. So Bree might not know that I just drank a shot, right? I think it's vodka that you can't smell. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to calm my nerves, but I can't betray myself. So I know what's happening, and that's what makes the dilemma more severe. So I reinforce, I can't share private experiences. I'm punishing myself for being emotional. And I just move further and further away from balance. As I do that, I get more chaos in the relationships I have with other people. So the more compulsive behaviors I have, the more chaotic all of my relationships become. And pretty soon I'm way out. It feels like being on a roller coaster ride to be in a relationship with me, actually. So we don't want that. And so we need to intervene. I need to immediately go back to Bree and say, "Oh, this is actually what's going on," and use interpersonal skills to reduce my emotional vulnerability. Maybe have more lights outside or something that helps me feel safer. And then I can be back in balance again. So it's not necessarily someone's trauma history that's going to create chaos. It's really their compulsive behaviors around being self-invalidating towards themselves that cause the chaos.
I have a question, Amy.
Yeah.
So when someone has that reactiveness from a previous trauma, is that reactiveness usually specific to the situation? So a similar type of trauma, like you were I was attacked and then I physically touched you. So, or would this just kind of be a reactiveness to anything that was a trauma to you? Does that make sense what my question is?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So it depends. So it depends on how ill I am, actually. So on one end, I can have a very specific trauma that happens, and I've associated some things to that trauma that create an emotional vulnerability for me. And so if you're going to think of like a continuum of trauma, so I might have a very acute trauma reaction. Usually, like if somebody was in a car accident or saw something, or maybe at the Chiefs parade and was close to the people that were shooting, or something that happened that was very specific, then you would have this acute reaction and you would want to be really careful to not get caught in a dilemma with them. Now, as you move towards, more of a mental health impairment, you're going to have from the acute reaction to a generalized reaction. So some people have this generalized anxiety. We see that a lot right now, especially following COVID. So I have some good friends that aren't leaving their house. And so they've generalized this, you know, fear into a place that's starting to cause some impairment for them. And then so you move from that to really post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's where they start, or people start having nightmares, or a more flashbacks or things kind of during the day that's bringing the trauma into the present moment. And so it's not just a generalized fear, it's just like bringing it right here, right now. So from post-traumatic stress disorder to get more severe than that is usually where we start treating and interacting with people, and that's really borderline personality disorder. And so it is a trauma response, but the trauma usually for these people have happened before age 8. So it's like in their fundamental makeup, like their trauma responses and their fear is part of the foundation of how they've developed and grown and to learn their own emotional responses. From that, you can get dissociative disorder. So even more severe than borderline personality disorder, people are disassociating and not present in the moment at all. So the mindfulness really pieces of all of this is really getting this person into the moment. One of my favorite mindfulness exercises is for people just to slow down, to take some deep breaths, and to truly ask themselves, is there anything in this moment that is happening that is traumatizing to me? So your mind can get going and you're reacting a lot, but if you can get to a place of going, in this moment, right now, right here, right now, there is nothing happening, then people can actually then start to breathe and feel a little bit more grounded and be out of these dilemmas pretty quickly. But yes, every time God bless my husband, every time my husband is around his family, he breaks out in like psoriasis. So like you can see trauma responses, just somatically, like people start to feel sick or they start to feel overwhelmed. And so you want to really understand, like, where is it coming from? And there is no reason. His family is super loving and super kind now. So how can you then move from a fear of the past to being in the present? And it takes a lot of work. It really does. Any other questions about that? So we talked about the chaos that can start to present in relationships following trauma. Labile emotions is something else that starts to happen. So with trauma, you can be feeling fine, maybe even content and relaxed, and then all of a sudden feel highly agitated or upset or angry. And for the people around you, they don't even know where that's coming from. And so that's a good indicator that it's a trauma response and not from the moment. So like, if I was with a good friend or someone around me and everything's calm and seems to be going well, and then all of a sudden their mood changes dramatically, they've usually tripped into some sort of trauma memory that has happened. So you can also like tell, which is fascinating to me, by the dilation of someone's pupils. So if you are sitting across from someone and you're directly talking to them, and let's say you have brought up a subject that you know is triggering for them, you can see their pupils actually dilate bigger. Now, for therapists, what we do is then we start to ask you more questions. And so if you, but what a normal, like in a normal conversation, you would want to avoid and make that person feel at ease again. And it's something we do pretty automatically. So you might just kind of watch in your relationships with people if you're seeing their pupils dilate or something that's going on. Trauma brings about impulsivity. So the person will become more impulsive and reactive in situations. And then lastly, there's a lot of confusion about self. So I don't know what direction I want to go in or what I want to do or who I am or if I did the right thing in that situation. And people are usually talking over and over again about that situation. So for those are pretty early signs of what you can see. One of my friend's daughter just got in a car accident. And so I knew that she was traumatized afterwards because she had a lot of confusion. Maybe I shouldn't drive. Maybe I'm a really bad driver. I don't remember exactly what I was doing, and all of this, heightened emotion and reactivity to it. Would you like me to share some of the skills out of DBT? Okay. So the first thing, so when you notice that you're at one of these extremes, what you're going to do is try to get into your own wise mind. So instead of taking the shot at vodka or anything else that's maladaptive, when there's all kinds of maladaptive things people do, all kinds, you're going to try to get into wise mind. So the first thing is to slow down and take a step back. And there's really 3 distinct things that people need to do to get into wise mind. The first thing is that they need to observe. They need to notice what they're experiencing without getting caught up in the experience and without reacting to it. Marsha Linehan uses the phrase of have a Teflon mind. You're going to see something come in and you're going to let it slip right out. So you try not to hold on to anything. You're just trying to observe. You're going to control your attention in the situation. So I remember when my kiddos were young, and I think my daughter had fallen up on the playground and she was crying. She was really upset and starting to hyperventilate. To control your attention, you're going to focus on something. So in this particular situation, I said, how many things on this playground can you point out that are blue? So it's really starting to focus your mind in on what is around you. If you're looking at someone, to say I'm looking at Bree, because your camera's on and I am looking at you, And I started to get really anxious and upset. What I would want to do is start to label things about Bree. Do you have blue eyes? Can't really tell. And then I would maybe describe your earrings, what you're wearing. So your focus really becomes very concrete and non-judgmental in the situation. So you just have to look at it and start to label things that don't really have an association to you in your mind or a judgment for you. And then you want to be, I love this one, to really adequately observe. You want to be a guard at the palace gate of your mind. So you are knowing the sequence of what's coming in. So if I I go for a run almost every morning with a dear friend, and she has the news on as we're going to the place we run at. And so when we get there, if I start to feel anxious, being a guard at the palace gate of my mind really gives me the awareness of where that anxiety is coming from. Maybe on the news, I just heard that a runner was ran over by a truck. Actually probably will be on the news tomorrow morning now that I say that. So whatever it is causing my emotional state at the moment, I want to be able to tie together what is actually happening in that situation. So I'm in the moment, but what is going on and what have I heard? And that being a guard at the palace gate of your mind is allowing your awareness to be streamless. So it's kind of like waking up from a dream is what observing feels like. So when you get really triggered, you need to wake up and you need to be present and you need to not be in a dream-like fog. You need to actually be in the moment. And then you want to watch your thoughts coming and going and notice how you're feeling and notice exactly what you're doing. So one of my really bad habits, and I love that I'm talking to people that I really can't see right now, is that if I get really nervous, I will pick at my feet. I know. So it's bad. Like I can't watch a really intense movie without shoes on. like I gotta just have shoes on. My poor son has the same bad habit. I don't know if I taught him that or if we're both just anxious people. But noticing, if you have a bad habit like that, there's going to be a time that you have to notice what you're doing. And a lot of people don't actually notice what they say or what they do. I have done so much marriage counseling where I will repeat verbatim what someone has just said. And they will say to me, I didn't say that. And I think, I need a recording. But it's true. You're not observing a lot of times what you're saying or how you're reacting. And if you were, you would swear, I wouldn't do that. So that's part of observing. And then notice all of your senses, what you're seeing, what you're smelling. The term here is to stop and smell the roses. So I like this term because when you're observing, there's usually some positive things that are going on in a situation too, not just the negatives. I grew up in a very, very negative family, and it would have been unheard of to say something positive about a negative situation. But that's really what every good book tells you to do. You have to figure out the way through the obstacle, the problem, and figure out what is good and advantageous about that. So the whole thing there is that you're just observe, and you want to spend some time simply observing. What's difficult for us is that we're not very good observers. We like to describe at the same time. So once I start observing something, I like to describe what's going on. So once you start to describe a situation, you're no longer observing it. So after you observe, you want to describe. So it's really hard to spread these apart. Describing is where you put into words the experience that's going on. So you might say, my stomach muscles are tightening. I'm starting to feel anxious in this situation. I'm starting to have thoughts that I can't do this. But what you really want to do is slow down after you've put them into words and don't get caught in the content of what's going on. So you just want to get the overview of what exactly it is. Kind of like being outside yesterday. I hope you went outside yesterday and went for a walk for around or saw the flowers that are starting to bloom and all of that. So if I asked you to simply observe what was going on during that walk and then describe to me what you observed, it would be a very small snippet of what you actually observed. So there's some people that are phenomenal at describing things. I have a sister-in-law who is brilliant. She is so damn smart. And she writes and has beautiful stories that she can tell. I myself am not blessed like that. When I describe, I like to be very factual, like a manual type of thing. And so some people are just naturally better describers or can really capture the essence of an emotion or a situation and put words to it in a very beautiful way. And then other people really struggle with this. Like they don't know how they feel. They don't know how to describe it. They're just at a loss when it comes to describing. And then finally, for a wise mind, you want to participate. So you want to become one with the experience, completely forgetting about yourself. You act intuitively from wise mind, and you actively practice skills. And in those situations where you're fully participating, you're creating no harm. So full participation requires complete acceptance of yourself, the situation as it is, an active engagement in changing any harmful reactions and creating no future harm. So when you talk about a trauma response that moves people to extremes, they're actually creating harm. To be in a situation where you're creating no harm, you'll move towards a place of healing and even growth. So what we ask people to do, or what everybody needs to do, is spend, wouldn't it be great if we all had the ability to be monks and just spend our whole day observing and then describing and participating in a world where we're personally not creating any harm? That would be fantastic. So if you could spend 5 minutes a day trying this out, though, it would be actually life-changing. So to spend time simply observing, describing, and participating in a new way. The story that I sometimes give to kind of look at how this played out in my own life, which I try all the time to observe, describe, and participate. There's two stories. So when I was first learning this therapy years and years ago, I went skiing. And as I'm on top of the mountain and I'm really thinking about all of this, I start to observe. I start to look around, and it is stunningly beautiful on top of a mountain. And I'm also observing like how cold it is. The smell is crisp and just it's really impossible to describe. So I'm on top of this mountain, I'm observing, and I want to capture that memory forever. I want it to be outside of time itself. It was just stunning. And then I start to describe. And what I described was, I think I forgot how to ski. What do I do? Okay, I have to bend my knees and I have to go this way and then that way. And I have to bend forward a little bit. I'm hungry. Like when I get to the bottom of this mountain, I hope I have enough money to afford a hot chocolate. I am going to get some more of those hand warmers and toe warmers. And God, I want to remember how beautiful it is up here. So I literally start to describe my path down the mountain and what I'm going to do. So then I push off the mountain. As I push off the mountain, I am skiing. And that's what participation is. I am completely 100% skiing. So as I'm skiing down the mountain, I decide I'm fully participating. Maybe I can observe and describe at the same time. So I look up to observe and I immediately fall. So that's kind of the beauty of these three, and to kind of keep in mind like how they all work together, but they're completely different things that you have to do. So you have to observe, describe, and participate. And then another example of changing behavior. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was 37 and I was still nursing my son. And I began to get really, really tired, and I would sweat just like, getting up from a chair. And I was thirsty all the time. So I went to my doctor and I started to describe the symptoms I had. And she's observing, right? And she's saying, well, let's do this test to see if you have diabetes or what's going on. And so the test came back. I did not have gestational diabetes, but very, very close to having it. So close that I immediately needed to change what I was doing, or that was going to be what happened there. So I observed what she was telling me, and I believed that she was absolutely right, that made sense to me in my own wisdom. And then I started to describe. So I don't know if you guys have ever gone to the library and tried to look up books on gestational diabetes, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of books of what you can do differently, right? So I like to read, so I read several books and described to myself, what can I actually do different, right? So here's what I'm doing now. Here's the advice. What do I need to do? So then I went back to the observe. What am I doing? How can I do something different? And then I described to myself, okay, I'm going to stop eating processed foods, and I'm going to start exercising every day. So I can do both of those things. Great. So the next morning I wake up, I go into the office, somebody's brought in donuts, of course, and then it's time to participate. So I don't have any donuts. I go for a walk and try my best to continue to observe and describe and follow the path of being more healthy for myself and for my little one. So that's how these kind of all work together. Usually when people are trying to change a habit, they go from observe to describe, observe to describe, observe to describe before they move on to participation. When you see someone fully participating in life, in my opinion, it is the most beautiful thing you could ever see. So whether it's going to see a concert and seeing someone perform and they are masterful, right? So there's moments that we see people participating in a way of life where they you know that it took hours and hours and hours of practice to try to get that to a place of beauty and perfection. But then once they're there, they're fully immersed in it, and it can be some of the most delightful ways you see anybody being in life. So that's the goal, is to fully participate without that anxiety or fear or trauma responses. All right. So you always, when doing mindfulness, just to be very non-judgmental, be in the moment and be effective. So effective is one of my most favorite skills because it talks about focusing on what works. So you have to stay away from defining things as fair and unfair or should not. You just get your mind unglued from that and say, to be effective, I can't focus on what's fair or unfair. You have to play by the rules. What I love about this one is that many times I think I know a better way. And it's not that I don't. Sometimes I'm actually right. I do know a better way. But in systems and in organizations, the only way to change something that's going on is to play by the rules of the system you're in. And then you can create change. But if you try to enforce your way first, you're not going to be effective. And then you act as skillfully as you can, meeting the needs of the situation that you're in, not the one that you wish that you were in. You always want to keep your eye on the objective. And you, most importantly, have to let go of anger. So you cannot be righteous. So if you want to be effective in situations, even if somebody has treated you unfairly and done you wrong and they shouldn't have, and they should have listened to you, all of that, you have to let it go, and you have to just focus on what's going to work. All right. Any questions or any thoughts? Was it better for me to stand up and draw on the board?
I liked it.
I liked it a little bit better too.
Yeah, the chat is open and the Q&A is open, or you guys all have the ability to ask a question, so feel free to unmute yourselves. You should look at my notes. It's just like, you can't see it. It's just craziness. The diagram that you were drawing behind you, what was the name of this concept?
So those are called dialectical dilemmas.
Okay.
And they're definitely in my book, You Untangled, but you can find them. Just Google common dialectical dilemmas, and there are volumes of information about them. And I think that's the single most contribution of Marsha Linehan to the psychotherapy field, but the most overlooked in her work, because most people know her for her skills and not really the dialectical dilemmas, which I think are profound.
We had a comment that said, thank you. It's a very interesting topic. I agree. I think you brought a different perspective. I could relate to a lot of things that you were saying. And so to be able to put that into an image, one, I appreciate the visual. And then to break those things down, it just kind of validated everything. So.
All of the dialectical dilemmas or even cognitive distortions and Beck's work around that are so fascinating. So you almost wouldn't be able to watch the media without putting that filter on people's comments. So you're like, gosh, these people aren't very healthy. But
So if you have one thing to take away today, what would it be, Amy?
One takeaway that I would say is, for emotional vulnerability, the best thing that you can do is self-validate. And so if you are in a situation where you want to berate yourself for your emotional reaction, if you can find a way to validate yourself anyways, that would be the best thing that you can do. My husband, who I love, 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 he and I got into a fight this week, and I was absolutely terrible. I was so mean. And he said, honey, you're being a bitch, right? And I was like, I was trying really hard. I'm glad you recognized my efforts. And that really kind of stopped the argument because I was so mad. And he didn't deserve that, but everybody fights, everybody gets angry, everybody feels ashamed, everybody gets into those situations. And instead of like getting bad, angry or more self-invalidating, just to go, yeah, sometimes I get really angry and I act in really absurd ways. And sometimes I'm not very nice, and even quite mean, actually. Sometimes I feel ashamed, and I'm not going to make it worse by saying that there's something wrong with me. I'm just going to normalize and say, that was me being emotionally reactive. And um, that was that moment. So
Well, thank you so much, Amy.
you're
And
welcome.
we can find you at lilaccenter.org. And then your books are available. Where can we find those?
Oh, just on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to publish a new book at the end of this year. I hope it'll be done by then. It'll be treating trauma with DBT.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and joining us
Yeah.
today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, Amy, will you take care?
You too.
Bye.